Extract from the official 728th Contact Report of November 30, 2019, translated with deepl.com. Disclaimer. This is an unofficial translation. Source:
Zeitzeichen
141 on page 2 to 6.
Of course you can ask.
We've already talked several times about the Bermuda Triangle, where I was with your father Sfath, and he explained a lot of things to me, including the methane gases on the ocean floor that dissolve, rush up and dilute the water and air to such an extent that even large ships disappear into the sea and even airplanes suddenly crash. Ships and airplanes are then also driven very far away by the currents and can no longer be found, or only with difficulty. But ships are also sunk by huge monster waves, as I saw one that Sfath had measured with almost 42 meters height. In addition, magnetic storms also occur here and there in that huge area from the Earth's interior, as Sfath explained, which are especially fatal for airplanes. That's one thing, because there are other occurrences in the Bermuda region, but also in other places, like for example in the Japanese Teu Sea, that is, the Dragon's Triangle, an area in the Pacific Ocean, which is about 100 kilometers south of Tokyo near Miyake Island. What happens there and in the Bermuda Triangle, also happens in other places in the Atlantic and Pacific, but also the Indian Ocean and other places where ships disappear without a trace, which at present is supposed to be about 2 ships a week, as some statistics show. However, it is not always natural phenomena that cause ships to disappear into the depths of the sea, but it is also often insurance fraud or other criminal activities. But I am also aware, as Sfath told me, that in the various strange places where ships and planes are disappearing in strange ways, the events are of completely natural origin, with one exception, which I shall keep quiet about, as well as about the other phenomena by which ships and planes disappear without a trace. Your father Sfath has shown me some phenomena in this respect. Besides enormous gigantic megawaves and methane gas explosions, which blew up very high explosion fountains over the water surface. But now I ask myself, because the following internet excerpt was sent to me, whether I should remain silent about the fact, even in the present time, which other phenomena, unknown to earthly scientists, still exist, which are still present in the Bermuda Triangle and in other places, as in general over and in the seas, the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans etc. Ships and planes, and make them disappear. What do you think?
There is probably nothing against saying something about the knowledge my father has imparted to you. This also with regard to the phenomena which you have mentioned and which are still unknown to earthly scientists, but which I myself could also observe, because I am also interested in the events which seem so mysterious to earthly people, but which are absolutely natural.
Well, then I can say something, even if antagonists, know-it-alls, troublemakers, scientists, researchers and other negators of some kind run amok against me and my presentation. Then I want to say that I have seen many phenomena in the bearship of your father Sfath, which are actually not visible to the naked eye, but can only be made visible on screens by electronic means. That was, for example, far out at the edge of our solar system, as well as on salt planets and their moons, but also on and around the Earth, when Sfath let me watch the solar winds etc. Well, what I want to say now, however, is the fact that in the Bermuda Triangle and also elsewhere in areas of the world's oceans, gigantic shock underwater storms and shock over water storms are taking place, which cannot be detected without highly sensitive electronic equipment and can only be made visible on monitors equipped for this purpose. One of these phenomena, which I will simply refer to as underwater shock storms, is that gigantic shock waves race through the depths of the oceans at hundreds of kilometers per hour and act like gigantic hammer blows on anything that comes into their range. If ships are hit by them, no matter how small, large or powerful, the shockwave forces acting on them cause demolitions and let the ships sink in a matter of seconds or minutes, whereby they are also carried away by the enormously gigantic shockwave forces, only to disappear somewhere in the sea forever. These shockwaves, Sfath explained, are caused by two different phenomena, either by magnetic storms within the Earth and deep inside the planet, which act outwards and thus into the oceans as well as into the atmosphere. And with that on the other hand it can also be explained that above the oceans of the world there are also shockwave storms which race through the atmosphere with hundreds of kilometers per hour, can be many kilometers high and therefore also simply tear up, hurl away and crash airplanes, which are never found again. But that is not all, because a further emergence of such shockwaves results from seaquakes, but also from earthquakes as well as from irresponsible machinations of mankind, and that by dropping bombs in wars and there as well as by other powerful explosions the Earth is shaken deep into its interior, whereby shockwaves are caused in the seas and fresh waters. The same happens with all enormous explosions, such as those in mining, earth resources extraction, tunnel construction and other irresponsible planet-shaking and disastrous machinations of the Earthlings, who have no idea what planetary effects their violent actions have. All geological scientists have nothing but a big mouth and make themselves important in public with stupid banal sayings and pseudo-explanations, but they truly know nothing of all that is really happening on the planet. Nor do they have any idea what kind of all-destroying, tremendous, criminal and irresponsible damage and destruction has been done to the planet to satisfy the needs of the Earth's overpopulation. And these tremendous earthly powers go on undiminished and destroy the planet Earth more and more because the overpopulation continues to rampage in its growth, as well as the whole economic commerce connected with it and aimed at boundless profit, which, for the procurement of the more and more exuberant needs of the rampant overpopulation, does everything to slowly but surely destroy all possibilities of life and existence on Earth completely. In addition to all this, in relation to the increase in the mass of overpopulation, people are becoming more and more unfeeling and indifferent to one another, more and more hostile, unconnected, malicious and degenerating, as well as more insensitive, psychologically unstable and sick and unable to live. What I want to say now, that refers to what I learned from Sfath, namely that even scientists somehow rummage around behind the moon and do not deal with what would actually be fundamentally important. Although they have fields of science such as entomology or entomology, plant biology, domestic animals, wild animals as well as birds, poultry etc. On the one hand they lack the knowledge that everything has to be specified according to its genus and species and thus, for example, animals are only mammalian creatures that have nothing to do with birds, animals or insects, as these in turn have nothing to do with bees etc. So this, while on the other hand, it has not yet been understood and researched that all forms of life are sentient and therefore also have psychic impulses, just like humans as self-conscious individuals. It is admittedly assumed today that higher animals, that is, mammals, have psychic impulses, but this is precisely the whole wisdom of the natural and biological sciences. But that all living beings as a whole have a psychic form, such as an instinctive psyche, a sentient or energy psyche, which is also peculiar to lower beings like beetles and insects, creatures of all kinds, warren, lizards, snakes, fish and butterflies and moths, etc., which, moreover, are neither animals nor creatures, but their own genera and species, and so are to be called such, is something of which scientists have no idea at all. Nor do they know that even the lowest living beings communicate intensively with one another. In the same way, this scientific ignorance also applies to the entire biodiversity, respectively to the manifold width and breadth of the entire plant world. Because in this respect, too, the respective scientists have no idea that every single plant, from the tiniest moss thread to the giant tree, on the one hand has a psychic form, an energy psyche etc., as Sfath has described and explained it. On the other hand, plants and living beings communicate with each other very intensively, but as they all have a sense of pain, every single plant and every independent living being from the smallest to the largest genus and species. I was able to observe and experience this myself on plants and even insects, when Sfath experimentally let me see pain vibrations of plants and the smallest living beings on devices and monitors, and also perceive them nervously through an apparatus connected to my head and effectively feel and listen to them. I was also able to effectively hear the pain sounds of various plants through the apparatus on my head, such as, depending on how I was allowed to put it into my words, a whimper, a short cry, a groan, a longer lasting whisper of pain, a lament, moaning, crying, wailing, but I could also hear sadness, agony and sobs. Dear friend, the fact is that without overpopulation, all the enormous problems on Earth, all the destruction, devastation and extermination of nature, its fauna and flora, as well as all the impairment and destruction of all ecosystems around the world, all the hatred and the depravity of all people would never have come about. This, just as it would never have come about that a certain majority of Earthlings are literally bred into murderous combat machines by the military, secret services, special task forces, terrorist organizations and security services, etc. Just as it is the case with child soldiers and child terrorists, who then murder masses of people as unscrupulous killers. Basically, it is the case on Earth that since the origin of the Earthlings, murder and manslaughter, war and terror have reigned, whereby a religious delusion unconsciously causing them to degenerate. And this is effectively founded in all religious sectarian false and lie teachings, which on the one hand preach love, peace and freedom, but on the other hand begging God for helpful help and victory when wars are fought, even when it is a matter of bullying other neighbors or other fellow human beings by the devil's teeth, of driving them out, of making them impossible through lies and slander. Sectarian faith always comes to the fore subliminally and unconsciously and somehow leads to violence, often up to murder and manslaughter. Although lyingly written in the holy books and writings and declared by the believers' captors to be love and peace, this is immediately revoked by saying that God should assist in the struggle and ensure victory. If the following is preached: go and practice love, peace and harmony, then the sectarian delusional belief in God already contains the demand go there, and if your neighbor does not want to be your brother, then smash his skull in. Today, as a result of some relationships, enormous social divisions are also the order of the day, which cause feuds, strife and quarrels and even malicious violence, whether through xenophobia, religious or racial hatred, left-wing or right-wing extremism, envy of wealth, distrust, or as a result of hatred of refugees, which was created in many Europeans by the refugee crisis, which as a result of the stupidity of the German Chancellor Merkel with her absolutely idiotic refugee welcome culture has caused a lot of disaster, which has cost the lives of several tens of thousands of refugees so far. But that is not all. because there is also a tremendous mistrust among people today, as well as a serious lack of education, not only among young people, but in general. This is because digitalism, which is not being mastered because it came up far too early, has long since stopped Earthlings from learning, and they are now just fiddling around with their apps etc., and consequently no longer making an effort to make something better of themselves. If everything is looked at closely, then it will be recognized that all the most diverse criminal organizations and world wars, international and civil wars, as well as all religious sectarian and political terrorist organizations and all kinds of enormous human degenerations, such as these have been rampant in an ever more degenerate manner in the whole of the Earth's humanity since the year 1700. Without the unstoppable growing mass of Earthlings would never have come about. Of course, the Earthlings had already clashed again and again before through enormous wars, tortures and evil, brutal and murderous violence, and slaughtered, murdered, robbed, cheated and bashed each other's skulls, but never in the scope and in those enormous degenerations, as they were created by the rampant mass of mankind and became more and more insane. The more the Earthlings began to populate the world, the more and more degenerated everything became, also in regard to the belief in God, which already made the Italian navigator and adventurer Christopher Colombo or Christopher Columbus a mass murderer, when he was in Castilian service and was looking for the sea route to India. But in 1492 he reached an island in the Bahamas. There he was turned into a multiple murderer by Caribbean inhabitants, who called their island Guanahani, because he wanted to change the faith of the Eggborns to the Christian faith, but they refused to do so, so he killed several inhabitants of the island by his own hand, as his crew did. This fact, however, was concealed and has not become known until today. Like Columbus, the Spanish soldiers, explorers, adventurers and conquerors, the conquistadors, did it then, who during the 16th and 17th century took possession of large parts of North, Central and South America as well as the Philippines and other islands as Spanish colonies. And as is usual with conquests, thousands of murders were committed against the natives, as everywhere else. On the one hand, this was also due to the delusional belief of the invaders in God, because everything always had to be done in the name of God, but on the other hand, it was also due to greed for gold, which the natives forged in tons for their cults of gods. The Spanish conquistadors stole this gold from the natives, who were also slaughtered en masse by the conquerors. As Sfath explained, the conquistadors alone stole a total of more than 250 tons of gold from the Aztecs, Incas and Maya, enriching themselves enormously on the one hand and bringing enormous wealth to the Spanish crown on the other. The empires of the Aztecs, Maya and Incas conquered by the Spanish conquistadors counted, according to your father Sfath, at that time altogether as a large population of about 38 million people, and of these, the conquistadors or the Spanish adventurers and conquerors counting only ship crews were usually a large majority of 5,000 to 12,000 Aztec, Maya and Inca Indians. However, all these Indian peoples underestimated the superiority of the Spanish murderous invaders, who were trained in tactical strategic conquest battles and in modern combat tactics, which they had also used against the occupying forces from North Africa and the Moors. As a result, the conquerors had a great superiority over the weakly armed Indians despite small crews. They had practically no chance against the modern weapons of the conquistadors, so it was no disadvantage for them that they were often in a minority compared to the thousands of locals. The war experience and the superiority of the Spanish conquistadors in terms of weapons made the Aztecs, Mayas and Incas practically helpless against the conquerors. Consequently, their multiple superiority of warriors equipped with primitive weapons was of no use to them, and the large number of available warriors made a resistance simply impossible. In all their inexperience with regard to the modern weapons and equipment of the foreign Spanish invaders, which were actually tiny troops against the many thousands of Indians, the natives could not properly assess their great danger. The missing knowledge and the lack of knowledge concerning the cultural background of the Spanish conquistadors, as well as their effective intentions, respectively intentions, aspirations, thoughts, plans, intentions and will, as well as their being bound to their religious sectarian Christian delusions of God, made it almost impossible for the Indian tribes and their rulers to react correctly against the battle-tested foreign conquerors. Their belief to see in every natural event terrible omens of their gods often paralyzed them, and also had the effect that they had no chance to defend themselves despite their many thousands of fighters. The empires of the Incas, Mayas and the Aztecs had been built up by wars of conquest, but their weapons and art of warfare were practically ridiculous compared to the Spanish conquistadors, who were trained in fighting and equipped with modern weapons. The peoples conquered by the Aztecs, Mayas and Incas had to pay tribute to the Indian conquerors, but still they were not integrated into the empires of their conquerors. In the great empires lived nevertheless many different peoples. Following that also many different languages and religions prevailed, whereby however, except the Inca Empire, the empires of the Aztecs and the Maya did not have a uniform government administration, as Sfath explained. These empires were relatively unstable, because there was no uniform jurisdiction and no uniform legislation. There were also no standing armies to control and constantly occupy subjugated peoples and their territories. The conquistadors took advantage of the dissatisfaction of the subjugated peoples and were able to influence them in such a way that they allied themselves with the conquerors and set off against the rulers and populations of the empires, which ultimately led to the collapse of the indigenous populations, Spain claiming total dominion and calling the conquered territories New Spain. Between 1400 and 1600, the Spanish conquerors brought to the empires of the Aztecs, Incas and Mayas various diseases from Europe, especially venereal diseases such as syphilis, etc. But also smallpox, which quickly proved fatal for the natives, thus decimating the peoples in this way and through famine. According to Sfath, who was active in those great empires at that time, the Aztecs, Mayas and Incas lost more than 2/3 of their populations through the direct and indirect fault of the conquistadors. Sfath said that at that time, as a result of the missionary Christ zeal of the Spanish conquistadors, whole peoples were deprived of their cultural identity, their honor and dignity, their existence and their possessions and cohesion within a few weeks, by murderous and brutal robbery, rape of women and children and other sordid machinations. What happened as a result of the atrocities committed by the Spanish conquistadors against the Aztecs, Incas and Mayas also took place in Europe, but in a different way, namely through the persecutions of witches, which took place mainly in the early modern period, from 1450 to 1750. In addition, many other inhumanities and problems of all kinds have always been caused, including the destruction, extermination and extermination of many living creatures in nature and their fauna and flora. And in all of this, since time immemorial, there has always been some religious sectarian madness, some kind of delusional belief in God. Already since ancient times the believers were mad and delusional and had to be left in their faith and left alone, because otherwise they killed all those who said something against their delusion. So every human being has always, as a result of his belief in God, always put his own stupidity and skin on the market, and in this way determined his personal fate. But let us leave all this, for on the one hand all kinds and events of human atrocities cannot be enumerated in their mass, and what I say will in any case stimulate neither the intellect nor the reason of the great mass of earthlings. For the plague of mind non-reasonableness is rampant everywhere and up to the highest circles of governments and scientists, researchers and all other loudmouths, in such a way that every word that is full of understanding and reason is nothing more than a breath of nothingness for all of them in their stupidity and idiocy. So you better read this double article, which was probably taken from the internet somewhere.
You will be right about that, because your words will remain soundless.